in which we've mostly followed this very central character, a man called Paul, who had an extraordinary experience of Jesus for himself and started telling other people about Jesus. And we followed him around the Mediterranean on different journeys, going to different places, quite often facing a lot of opposition. He'd been arrested a few times. At one point, people tried to kill him by throwing stones at him. He was left for dead. He's had all sorts of dramas going on. And it's been really inspiring. I found it really, really inspiring to follow his journeys. And everywhere he's gone, he's told people about Jesus. Some people have opposed that message, but others have responded. And there's been joy and love and new little baby churches starting up all over the then known world. And last week he was in a city called Ephesus, which today you would find in Turkey. And he started a church there. And this week he is still there. There's been, again, quite a lot of dramatic opposition, and you'll see a bit more in this reading that we're just about to hear from Joel. So I just wanted to give you that context, really, and after Joel's read it, I'll try and help us to see why that's relevant to us today. So thank you, Joel, for doing our reading for us, and you can follow it up on the screens as well.
This is from Acts 19, verse 23 to 31. About that time, no little disturbance broke out concerning the way. A man named Demetrius, a silversmith who made silver shrines of Artemis, brought no little business to the artisans. These he gathered together with the workers of the same trade and said, "Men, you know that we get our wealth from this business. You also see and hear that not only in Ephesus, but in almost the whole of Asia, this Paul has persuaded and drawn away a considerable number of people by saying that gods made with hands are not gods. And there is danger not only that this trade of ours may come into disrepute, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis will be scorned, and she will be deprived of her majesty that brought all Asia and the world to worship her." When they heard this, they were enraged and shouted, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians!" The city was filled with the confusion, and people rushed together to the theatre, dragging with them Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians who were Paul's travelling companions. Paul wished to go into the crowd, but the disciples would not let him. Even some officials of the province of Asia, who were friendly to him, sent him a message urging him not to venture into the theatre.
Thank you so much, Joel. If we can just have the first of the slides of that reading back up again, I'll refer to it in a minute. So why are we trying to learn something from what happened nearly 2,000 years ago to a guy going around the Mediterranean telling people about Jesus? And I want us to hold in our mind this morning two questions. How does God's love change the world? How does God's love change the world? That is the first question. And the second question is, how can we join in? How does God's love that's found in the person of Jesus, that's poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit, that we experience in every grace in our lives, from the gift of children to the pouring out of the sunshine to friendship to everything that's good in our lives, how do we see God's love changing the world, and how do we get to join in with that process? Now, this series going through Acts has used the E word, the evangelism word. And that is a good word. It means spreading the good news of Jesus. But for many of us, that word evangelism is a little bit tainted. It maybe carries with it some not very tasteful thoughts of perhaps slightly corrupt preachers from the other side of the Atlantic who kind of want people's money. Maybe that's what springs to mind. Maybe we think of slightly weird people walking around in Regent Street shouting and carrying placards. And we generally, this word evangelism has some negative connotations. It does in my mind. And we can feel it's something that is not really for us. But if we ask that question, how does God's love change the world and how can we join in? That is exactly what we're talking about. That is what evangelism is. Looking for where God's love is changing the world or can change the world and getting involved ourselves. So don't be put off by that word evangelism. And when I think of the idea of changing the world, I'm always reminded of a really, really good friend of mine. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about her towards the end, but her name's Esther. similar age to me. We've been good friends for years and years and years. And when we were in our 20s, we worked together in a theatre company, and we used to get theatres under pubs in Earl's Court that were always really grotty, and we'd put on a play, and we would have a message that was really positive, or that was the aim of it, and we would say to each other, we're going to change the world. We're going to change the world through our grotty little plays in grotty little pubs in Earl's Court. We're going to change the world. And God's love is changing the world. How can we join in? I'll come back to her later. So let's get into this passage that Joel just read us, this story about rioting in Ephesus, in this ancient city. And I want to just draw out two really important things, or things that really struck me as important as I was looking into it. And the first one comes in that first verse. About that time, no little disturbance broke out concerning the way. Well, what is that? So I wonder how you think about the Christian faith. I wonder how you think about it. It's described there as the way. And before Christians were called Christians, they were called followers of the way. It's a phrase that comes quite a few times in the book of Acts. They weren't called Christians until Acts chapter 11 in Antioch. Christian means little Christ, by the way. But they were called followers of the way. Jesus, the way, the truth, and the life. But how do you view Christianity? If you view it as a really good moral framework, 10 Commandments, love your neighbour as yourself, well, yeah, that's great, but it's not really about following the way. And look, everywhere that those Christians went in the New Testament, there were like riots and things going on, so it wasn't all kind of sweetness and light. Do you maybe view Christianity as an add-on to a life that you've got that's pretty much perfect? You know, you've got your great job, you've got your good relationships, your happy family, your lovely home, but something's missing, so we're just going to see church as a little add-on to that. Nothing wrong with that, but again, you won't quite get the whole picture of following the way. Do you see Christianity maybe as a religion among many, one among many? It's a good choice. It kind of is relevant because, you know, we're here in Marlow and it seems to be a bit easier to manage that than some of the other faiths. If Christianity is just manicuring the edges of your life, then you've missed something amazing. You've missed something amazing. Because Christianity is about following the way that Jesus lived. The way with a small w, a way of life that involves not just peace and lovely songs in a church, but actually being out there amongst people, at times being incredibly pressured and busy, at times facing opposition, at times giving your life for others, at times risking spending time with the lowlifes, the drunkards and the gluttons and the prostitutes and the tax collectors. It meant all of that for Jesus. It meant giving his life. Following the way means that life of adventure that took Paul round the Mediterranean telling people about Jesus. And it also means following the way with a capital W. It means following Jesus himself. It means knowing Jesus, knowing that we are loved. Oh my goodness, if you knew everything that goes on inside my head, you wouldn't think I was very lovable. But I am loved by Christ, and you, whatever is going on in your life and whatever goes on in your head in your darkest moments, whatever storms you're facing, you are loved by Jesus. And if you get involved with following the way, if you start that relationship with him, or you're in that relationship with him, then life will never ever be dull, and it will be so much more than just tidying around the edges of a nice life. It will be so much more than that. How does God's love change the world, and how can we get involved? Well, maybe just by making a start in that journey. Maybe just by responding to that love for ourselves. Maybe that's something you've never considered doing. It's been lovely having Maisie getting back to, she's tucking into a little picnic now. It's like the feeding of the 5,000 on the front row. But, you know, Maisie is starting that journey today as a follower of the way. And I hope she won't get arrested for it. But she is on an adventure now because she is a follower of the way. maybe that's a response that you need to make. How can we get involved in God's love changing the world? Maybe just by making that first step, by responding to the way. I've gone right off my notes. Just to say as well that was what motivated Paul, that he was following the way. And I love that bit at the end of the reading. We don't need to flick back onto it. But they've taken Aristarchus and Gaius into the stadium in Ephesus. This was a 25,000-seater. So it's quite a lot bigger than Adams Park, but it's not as big as the Emirates, okay? Somewhere between, about halfway between the two in size. And they're there, it's full of people. And Paul is like, can I go? I just want to preach. I just want the opportunity to share this message of God's love with those 25,000 people. And everyone says, no, Paul, because they're actually going to kill you today. So they keep him back. And you need to read the rest of the story to find out what happened. But he was so motivated by his love for Jesus and knowing that Jesus loved him that he wanted to go and do that. So that is my first point, that we can be followers of the way. And if God's love is changing the world, the best way we can join in is by becoming followers of the way ourselves. But there's a little bit more to the story than that, isn't there? So can we flick down to verse 27, please? Let's just have a look. So this is this silversmith. I don't know if you picked up on him. Silversmith called Demetrius. And he's busy making shrines to the goddess Artemis, who was like the kind of mascot goddess of the city of Ephesus. They had this big temple to her. And, it was big business as well as being big religion. And Demetrius the silversmith realizes that his trade is going south because everybody's starting to follow Jesus. And I think this is an interesting little bit. There is danger not only that this trade of ours may come into disrepute, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis will be scorned. How does God change the world, and how can we join in? Well, God changes the world by bringing challenges on every level. There was a financial challenge there. There was a cultural challenge there. There was a religious challenge. There was a challenge to the state, in fact. And Demetrius was no fool. He could see that all of this was going to be a threat to the way of life that he'd enjoyed up to that point so far. Following the way does change things. Because the more we fall in love with Jesus, the more we know that we are loved by him, the more we're changed by the security and the wonder and the comfort that that love brings into our lives. And fake gods get left behind. I wonder what the fake gods are in your life. I wonder what the fake gods are here in Marlow in the 21st century. I'm slightly reluctant to try and name some. But I want to say, what does it look like when God's love is changing the world and people start leaving behind those fake gods? Well, it looks like 4 pretty random, lovely, but ordinary people going off to Burundi to make a massive difference and raising a shed load of money to do that. Not for themselves, not to have a nice jolly, but to go and do something amazing. It looks like 100 or more people volunteering at Lighthouse each summer so that children can find out more about Jesus. It looks like Matt, our intern, he's not here this morning, he's off in Marlow Bottom this morning, but Matt, our intern, giving up a year of his life to work for peanuts, telling our young people about Jesus and what an amazing job he's doing. It looks like food banks that were started by Christians to help feed the poor. Maybe one day it will look like food banks closing down because we've actually worked out how to do that in a better way. It looks like people like Vanessa involved in refugee action and lots of others, sorry, didn't mean to single you out, helping refugees. It looks like my friend Esther changing the world. There's a little party going on up there, isn't there? It looks like my friend Esther changing the world by starting a theatre company, working in prisons, changing the lives of offenders, and then starting up a writing program so that they go out and they do stuff in community schools, preventing knife crime and gun crime in our cities. It looks like her not finding a life partner because actually she spends all her time working with criminals, and adopting a little boy because that was the best way for her to be able to have a family. Would she say she regretted that? No, because she's busy changing the world. It looks like Well, what would it look like in Marlow for our fake gods to be left behind? Maybe it would look like a slightly fairer high street where there wasn't quite so much expensive stuff. Maybe it would look like our mental health places not being quite so overburdened, because actually teenagers discovered that they were just valuable because of who they are, not because of what they look like or the grades they can achieve. Maybe it would look like fewer places that are about us enhancing how we look, and a bit more about all of us learning to be loved and to love others. I don't know. I'm just picking out a few things there. What would Marlow look like if we were seriously turned upside down by the love of God? If you're not a follower of the way, here's a chance for you to respond to that. If you are a follower of the way and you want to do more and be more involved in what God is doing, then here's a chance for that as well. If you want to know a bit more about this following the way, I can't recommend enough going to this event next Saturday to hear J. John. If you don't know anybody who's going, grab somebody here who looks like they might be a Christian and ask them to take you. They'll pay for you as well. What would it look like if our town was more and more in love with Jesus? How might it be transformed? Ephesus was turned upside down because God's love was changing the world, and those people joined in. We too can do that. So let's pause now and just pray. If you've never responded to that love of Jesus, if you're not sure if you're a follower of the way, I'm going to say a prayer now that you can echo in your own heart. Dear Lord Jesus, I know a little bit about you, but I want to know more. I want to follow your way. I know that that means turning away from fake gods and other things in my life. And that's a struggle, Lord, but I want to follow your way. I want to know you, the way, the truth, the life. I want to encounter your love that comes to me through your death on the cross and your powerful resurrection. Lord, I want to follow your way. Amen. And if you've prayed that prayer, do come and be prayed for more in a moment. I'm going to say some other prayers as well. We have an amazing prayer team here who always spend some time listening to God before our service. And I'm going to lead us in some prayers that will help us. And if you want to respond to one of these, that prayer team will be available after this and after the service.